Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the second in our series of 3 webinars jointly hosted by myself, Bonnie Joplin, Scheme Development Manager for SALSA, Richa Bedi Navik, Senior Global Standards Manager for BRCGS, and Helen Taylor, Technical Director at Cardiff Metropolitan University. In today's webinar, we'll largely hand over to Helen, who will firstly give you an introduction to the Food Centre at Cardiff Met University. We'll then have a brief recap of webinar 1, followed by a look in more detail at the research that Helen conducted with food businesses to inform and help develop our toolkit. We'll then look in much more detail at practical steps and tools that can support you as you consider which scheme is right for you and how you might make the transition between our respective schemes. And then finally, we'll finish off with a Q&A session. So I'll now hand over to Helen. Helen to introduce herself, the Food Centre and Cardiff Met University.
Hello, good morning everybody. Hope everybody's safe and well, and thank you for joining us today on our session. I just thought I should give you some context about what I kind of do and where I'm based. For those of you who don't know me, like Bonnie said, I'm Helen Taylor, the Technical Director at Cardiff Met University. And it's about 150 years old, and we've got 16,000 students globally all registered with us. Perhaps not on site at the moment, but they are with us. The food team, of which I'm one, is situated in the Sport and Health Sciences School, of which there are 5. And the actual Food Industry Centre itself, 0 to 5, was opened in 2009. On its current location, and we have approximately 40 staff. And we're working with 150 plus companies a year across all product categories. We're part of a collaboration called Food Innovation Wales, and we have many international partnerships. I haven't put all the logos up there, but I've just given you a little bit of a taste of some of the people that we connect with and partner with all over the world. Our priorities as a centre are covered in 4 areas really. We undertake research. Obviously this is part of what we do, research. We work with industry, ensuring that we are kind of up to date and we are realistic and we are relevant to the sector. We work on policy with Welsh Government to ensure that the food manufacturing sector in Wales is in its best position. And of course, as a university, we are looking at levels 4 to 7, so degree through to Masters and PhD in food and food-related subjects. We undertake anything you can think of in industry support. So if there's anybody out there wanting some help on anything, it's always good to contact us, because if I can't do it, I know a man who can. So today, one of our areas of speciality and expertise, which I'm going to be talking to you about, is food safety management systems. And I'm going to specifically be talking about the study that we've completed to support businesses transitioning from SALSA through to BRCGS START intermediate certification. But like I said, there are lots of things that we get involved with and expertise we have available. So please contact us. We work politically, and there's a photograph there of our Vice-Chancellor where the Premier of China came to visit us before lockdown earlier last year, or the summer before, talking to us about how we can help China with regards to their food safety policies and also implementation of systems into the country there. We work with many different cluster groups across different product categories, and we look at why companies are struggling to gain certification accreditation. There's a piece of work I did there on barriers to accreditation that you might find interesting, which is available on the Welsh Government website. Education-wise, as I said, we cover many different levels of courses, and from a research perspective, we complete research from food safety culture activity, which we're doing at the moment, through to listeria management, through to barriers to accreditation. We're really focused on the application of improving efficiency, systems and safety within manufacturing. So the facility itself, we have pilot plant, we have a fully functioning bakery, consumer science kitchen, we have a number of commercial kitchens, we have a high care, fully segregated drainage, airflow, ventilation and temperature control. We have low care facilities, and we also have fully functioning sensory analysis suites as well. So basically we have everything on site on one campus to support business. So that's a little bit of an overview of Cardiff Met, and there is a link there. So if you wanted to find out a little bit more about us, by all means, just help yourself, have a look on the web. Bonnie, back over to you, I think.
Thanks, Helen. So to recap, in session 1, both Rita and I introduced SALSA and BRCGS START to really set the scene. Hopefully you will have joined us for that, and so have some understanding of the similarities and the differences between our schemes. But if you couldn't make webinar 1, just a note there that it is available on demand via the BRCGS website, so do have a listen in. So to restate the purpose of the 2 schemes coming together at this time, it really is to provide better guidance and tools to help businesses, to help food businesses who are ready, willing and able to move from SALSA to BRCGS certification. Our series of 3 webinars take you through number 1, setting the scene, number 2, the practical steps that we'll uncover today, and then we finish up with webinar 3, where we'll share the experience of a business who has really successfully made that journey. As we learnt last time, the SALSA scheme offers a holistic and supportive approach to food safety certification, whilst moving towards BRCGS START and then eventually full BRCGS certification requires a more prescriptive approach. And the next slide really gives you a more detailed comparison of the key differences between our respective schemes, both in the approach, the scope of the standard and the audit duration itself. So we took you through this slide in quite a bit more detail in webinar 1. So if you missed that or would like a recap, then again, we'd really encourage you to visit the BRCGS website and listen to this again. But for now, I'll hand you back to Helen, and she'll share with you the findings from her research and introduce the toolkit that's really been helped to develop to help businesses decide which is the best scheme for them and to navigate the transition. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, I'm going to whiz through the journey, what we did and how we did it, to give you some insight as to how the tools were developed, created, and how you can apply them. So the issues that we see small food and drink businesses facing is, what scheme do I choose? What is appropriate for my business? Is it affordable? Am I going to be able to implement it? How much is it going to cost me, etc. So we know there are lots of questions and lots of things which create complexity for small businesses when making those decisions. But what is really important, and something that both SALSA and BRCGS recognise, is there is a scheme out there that is appropriate for all. And we want to try and help you find the one that's right for you at this time. I think the thing about developing and implementing a food safety management system is it's a continuum. It doesn't stop, it evolves. Things change, risks change and emerge. And we as a sector have to respond to that, be flexible and responsive. Each business will develop their system which is appropriate for them. And I think that this is what we have found as part of our research, and I will explain this in a little bit more detail. So what we did was we identified, wanted to define and develop the tools, and we reviewed both of the standards. We looked at both all the clauses from both schemes to identify what the differences were. As Bonnie's just said, we had a small slide, a short slide summarising that. And what we agreed was that the BRCGS START intermediate level would be the transitional step. So we agreed that SALSA would be a starting point, especially for businesses in the UK, and that they should transition from SALSA to BRCGS START intermediate, not from basic, not to basic. So there was an equivalence to the scheme standards with regards to SALSA and BRCGS START basic. We then wanted to ensure that we could enable food and drink manufacturers to look at where they were, look at their business maturity, look at their technical maturity to decide which scheme was appropriate for them, and how then they could work towards future-proofing and strategically moving towards their goals into that future. So how did I do it? Well, this is a really good slide. I'm proud of this one. So there's me at the top, 0 to 5. And the first thing I did, as you know, is research. I looked at the SALSA standard. I looked at the START standard. I kind of did a gap analysis between the two standards to identify what evidence was required for companies moving from SALSA certification to BRCGS START intermediate. Now, just to let you know, I've got over 30 years, unfortunately, in manufacturing and related and academic. I'm a BRCGS auditor, SALSA auditor, a mentor, and I have been working in the sort of food safety management system field for many, many years. So I've kind of used my expertise, knowledge, and working with clients for all of that time I've used that knowledge to understand where I think the gaps are. Also, SALSA did this independently, and the BRCGS team did it independently. And what happened was we decided on a list of questions. We created a checklist, which I then used to interview and discuss the clauses and the requirements of small food and drink manufacturers. So that was the third element of research. And then following the interviews with the small food and drink businesses, we reviewed that, we assessed it, and I was able to come up with the tools which we need to help you decide whether you're going to go with SALSA or whether you're going to go with BRCGS START. So this slide in itself actually describes the whole research activity and how my approach to the research. So as I said, the first stage or the first step was looking at the standards, reviewing the standards. This table illustrates very simply who reviewed the standard. So if you look at the left-hand column, you've got BRCGS, we have SALSA, and myself, 0 to 5. The number of clauses in each standard, 158, 103, and so on. And then what is interesting is the final column here, total number of clause differences. BRCGS estimated there were 86 clauses that required further evidence. SALSA determined there were only 44 clauses that required further evidence. And in my independent capacity, I kind of came up with 66. So following a few discussions and justifications and rationales, we all agreed that we would go with the 66 clauses that were identified independently. And those 66 clauses were defined into the transitional checklist, which was developed, which I then used to discuss with industry. So I created the transitional checklist, which we formatted and is available on the BRCGS website to download. And those are the 66 clauses which, like I said, I interviewed clients with, the businesses with, and I got some really interesting data from, which I'm going to share with you now. So this is an example of the checklist. And if you notice, if those of you who have seen the BRCGS self-assessments or checklists before, it's the same format, and there's some color coding sort of like there on the, if you look at 4.10.1.1 here, we've got like a dark green shade in there. And there's a reason for that, which will become apparent as I go through the data. But the dark green clauses have been identified as the clauses that require further focus in businesses. Those clauses that may be difficult or challenging for a business to evidence or to comply with. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through the findings of my research, but just keep that shading in mind, and then it'll all link together. So in terms of when I was discussing the 66 clauses with businesses, I put a set of metrics together, and this is what I did. I scored the answers, and I asked the clients and the businesses to think about whether they could easily comply with the requirements of the 66 clauses or find it difficult. So for example, here on the left-hand side, would they be able to comply with the clauses? Would they find it easy and scoring a 1, or find it difficult and not possible, scoring a 5? How long would it take them to comply with the clauses? Could they do it quickly, less than a month, or would it would take them longer, over 12 months? Do they have sufficient resource on site? So technical resources, it is important as you develop and you're putting food safety schemes into a business that you have sufficient resource, knowledge and skills to be able to implement effectively the requirements of any standard. So if you didn't have somebody on site, then you would score 3. And if you had somebody on site, you'd score 1. Had a consultant, you score 2. So a lot of the smaller businesses that I work with will have people who drop in and out of their business and who give them technical support or quality management system support, etc. And that's absolutely fine. And it's all part of the development and what is appropriate to your business. And then finally, the last factor or consideration I looked at was the factory, the unit, the premises. Would the premises and facilities be of a condition required for the product category that they were operating in, and would it be sufficiently compliant to the needs of the scheme of the BRCGS START Intermediate? So if it was fully compliant, it would score a 1, and non-compliant would score a 3. So you get the general drift. It's a nice little 1 to 5, and I was able to tot up and give every company a score. So after going through the 66 clauses with each business, what was interesting was I was actually completing a third-party audit in those businesses that I interviewed, and got their permission post-audit to have a one-to-one session with them and talk through the requirements. Because what I did was I interviewed SALSA certificated companies, and of course they all had different levels of knowledge, they were in different categories, and they were at different parts of their development, business growth and evolution. So it was very important to have that dialogue with them, because interpretation could have had an impact on, if I'd let them do it remotely, that's what I'm saying, it could have had an impact on the results. So it was important I had that dialogue with them for consistency, and I completed all the interviews. Most of the interviews took approximately an hour or so, just over an hour. And yeah, it was an interesting session. This table represents the results from the scoring that I did against each of the 66 clauses. And I'd like to draw your attention to the red column, which is my column of focus, I suppose. Out of the 66 clauses, if you look at the bottom of the table at the total, 18 of those red clauses, or the clauses of focus, are those that would be difficult for companies to really comply with. So those could be a deal breaker. Those could be those which would prevent a company or create a barrier for them transitioning from a SALSA certification to a BRCGS START Intermediate. Those in the middle column are less problematic, and potentially would be easier. And then the green ones, okay, relatively easy for somebody to present the evidence to comply with. So what we've done is we've, I suppose, filtered down from the 66 clauses that were different. We've now shown through interviewing different companies there were 18 clauses that required further focus that could be problematic. So 18 clauses identified for focus. That is what we've drilled down to as part of the research. And in summary, excuse me, those sections were section 3, and the areas of focus were around supplier management, corrective action and preventative action. And this was in relation to root cause analysis, because with the SALSA standard, this isn't particularly this isn't focused and a requirement of the SALSA standard, but it is for BRCGS. In section 4, further evidence was required around threat assessment of product and potential risks to deliberate contamination or damage. Another area of concern from those 18 clauses was the premises and layout, ensuring that the premises were sufficiently at the right specification and standards for compliance. Also, foreign body removal, detection equipment, etc. Not just foreign body removal, but obviously if you have, for example, a metal detector on site, it has to be specific, it has to have specification, you know, it has to have knockoff, it has to have the timer, it has to have, you can't interfere with the metal detector, etc. So how it's operated. So all of that, the foreign body removal equipment is really a significant focus. In section 5, new product development is an area which a SALSA company would need to do more work on to evidence that in terms of the clause for the START scheme, excuse me. Allergen management and product claim verification. So working on verification and pulling data together. High care and high risk premises, again, this section has specific requirements in terms of high care and high risk product activity and processing. So what was interesting for me is when we broke that down and we looked at those 18 clauses that required further evidence, 9 of those were from the basic section and 9 were from the intermediate. Now, don't forget, this is based on the interviews that I did over a cross-section of companies, and it's based on the company profile, the knowledge and skills of those individuals. So this gives us some indication of the key area of the areas for focus. If you're doing it yourselves or you're looking at it from your perspective, you might find your outcomes slightly different, and that's perfectly fine, because everybody's business is different, and that's something which I think has been which has been highlighted to me, because one size doesn't fit all. And we have to be very mindful of that when we're working with different businesses at different points of their evolution with staff, etc., and obviously the culture of that organisation and so on. So that's where I am. I've completed my interviews. I've got my checklist, completed my interviews, and now I've got my areas of focus. So this is a summary of the 6 companies that I sort of interviewed. So I've anonymised them. So there's companies A through F on the first column here. Product categories: dairy, bakery, ready to eat. Number of staff, so that tells me the different sized businesses. So some of them had 2 people in their business, some of them had 40. So we had a range of sizes of business. Some of them had been established less than a year, some had been established more than 25 years. So you had a good spectrum of businesses. Also, some of them already had a SALSA certificate. You're already SALSA certified. Some of those recently, some of those had been certified for a long time. Obviously, from a technical resource perspective, we had some, well, what was interesting was 3 of the businesses didn't have a technical resource on site. So all of the quality management system, creation, design, implementation was being completed by perhaps, you know, the senior management team or managing director. So perhaps somebody who wasn't in the actual field of quality management, quality or technical. Premises as well, obviously they were all dedicated manufacturing units, but it was interesting that, you know, they all considered that their premises weren't compliant with the requirements of the START intermediate standard. So this enabled me to do some math, and I ended up with perhaps 3 of the companies indicating that they would find it quite difficult to transition from SALSA to BRCGS START intermediate, indicated by the red cells. And then the other 3 companies, there's potential there for them to transition. And as I said, I use my scoring system, which I went through before with you. So that's just a little reminder. All right. Next, so from that, all that information, all that research and data, we designed a very simple 5 key questions that you need to ask yourself if you want to transition from SALSA to BRCGS START intermediate. So this slide, to me, is quite straightforward, and I would ask you to look at the blue squares. So the first question is, does the business operate from a commercial, non-domestic, government registered facility? And the answer is yes or no. So if it's a no, and if you look at the grey square, domestic premises cannot be BRCGS or SALSA certificated. So that's an easy first filter question. The second question is around, has the business been operating for more than 5 years in an approved facility? And if you notice, there's an asterisk on the 5 years. Now, the reason that I put that in there was because if you think about how businesses develop, every business would need to have sort of government approval or registration, whichever country that they find themselves operating in. Depending on the level of resource, the premises, the staff, okay, 5 years might be accelerated. You might be able to do it quicker. It depends on the resource levels. But as you're developing something, you go from micro business, you're trying to grow your business, and you're doing all these things. What tends to happen is, like I said, it's a continuum and it's an evolution of a business. So 5 years as an indicator would also help you to sort of like judge where you are. The third question is, do you manufacture in premises that have a defined layout, segregation and foreign body detection equipment? As I sort of suggested earlier, this area was a particular focus, and it was one of our top 18 clauses that the businesses would find difficult to comply with. So I pulled that out because I feel it's something that it's an investment in your premises. You may need to look at your equipment. So there could be a significant capital expenditure requirement there. So if you say you've got all of that in place, then you're on the BRCGS START intermediate sort of pathway. If you say no to it, you may want to consider the SALSA pathway. Then question 4 is, does the business have more than 20 employees, including dedicated technical staff? This question is related to knowledge, skills, and resource. In my experience and from the research that I've completed, those companies without sufficient knowledge, skills, and resource struggle to implement and apply the requirements of any scheme. So if you have sufficient resource in place, then perhaps the BRCGS pathway is the one for you. But if you have less resource, or you're at the starting point of something, then perhaps the SALSA pathway is your choice. So what the last question 5, is, what food safety standard do your customers require at present and in future? Well, this is trying to think about the future of your business and strategy around what markets do I want to enter? Do I want to enter a retail market? Do I want to stay local? Do I want to stay, you know, at a small level? So depending on what your customers are requesting, that may have an impact on your choice that you need to make and what system and scheme you need to implement. So those 5 key questions are basically, you know, the things that will help you to understand what may be an appropriate scheme at this time for your business. And of course, circumstances change, everything moves on, and that like I said, it's an evolution. So that's another one of our tools that we've pulled together. So if you think about the toolkit so far, it's a bit of a summary. This section here is what to consider. This is available on the BRCGS website, SALSA website, and ours. What to consider when choosing a food assurance scheme. This is a summary of SALSA and BRCGS and how what their scope is, and in terms of what they're trying to be. So, for example, SALSA is a holistic scheme, whereas BRCGS will be more prescriptive. And as Bonnie said, if you have listened to the first webinar, that will be explained in more detail. So this is kind of a summary. And then on the bottom of that A4 handout is the actual the 5 questions, which we've just run through. So that's something that you can use. And of course, if you come to the end of that and you've decided, okay, I think SALSA is an appropriate scheme for me at the moment, you're able to contact the SALSA scheme owner and you can complete a SALSA sort of checklist. You can register for the standard, which is free, and you can talk to the scheme owner about how to develop and perhaps gain mentoring, etc. for SALSA. If, however, you've got the BRCGS outcome, then again, contact the scheme owner. There's a transition checklist available, which you can access, which is the 66 sort of questions, which I pulled out from the full BRCGS START standard. And there's also the BRCGS START checklist itself, which includes all of the clauses. So perhaps as a starting point, if you're looking at moving from SALSA to BRCGS START Intermediate, the transitional checklist might be a good place to start. Too many starts in that sentence, wasn't there? So as I said, the on the base there is the actual checklist. So in summary, if you're considering certification as a journey, as I think we all do, and from my experience I do, looking at the box on the right here, the transition toolkit, what could that look like, or what have we got in the toolkit? So if you're right at the start and you have no certification, then perhaps thinking about becoming a SALSA Go member, and that would help you prepare to move into SALSA. The scheme owners will be able to give you a self-assessment checklist as part of that, so you can have an understanding of what you need to do to comply. There's also scheme guidance available, and there's also mentoring support. So that's right at the start of the journey. The tools that we've developed from this research around the 5 key questions and the transition checklist, which contains 66 clauses for us to look at. Those are available on the website. And of course, if you are then transitioning onto the full BRCGS Food Safety, which is now in issue 8, then you are able to look at the full self-assessment checklist for BRCGS START self-assessment. Then if you want to go on to the next stage, you will go for issue 8 Food Safety full self-assessment. So this slide here really summarizes the toolkits and the information that is available for you, and all of it is available on both scheme owners' websites. So if this is something that you want to think about for your businesses, please go ahead, contact the scheme owners and use the toolkits that are available for you, and hopefully it will help you to come to the right decision for you. And I think that's it from me at the moment. I think I'm going to hand over to Richa to kind of look after the end of the presentation. Richa?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. And Bonnie, brilliant presentation, Helen, first of all. And thank you so much for all the research that went into this project. Really extensive, really sort of detailed focus. And I'm really happy. And I think both the organizations equally are very happy with the toolkit that we could develop for the industry and support small businesses and take them on the journey with us from being a new starter into the intermediate program, and then finally looking at the BRCGS full certification.
Mm.
So yeah, what is next in the series, the final episode essentially, this is where we bring the real experience. So we set the scene, we spoke to you guys about the two schemes, gave you an insight into SALSA, into BRCGS START intermediate, both levels. Helen today has spoken to us about the toolkits, various documentation, various sort of roadmaps that are at your disposal to use, whatever suited to your business. And finally, we will bring in a perspective in the next episode, essentially, from a organization that's been on the journey. So this organization essentially started off with SALSA, and they've gone on to full BRCGS certification. So they will talk about the practical implementation, practical challenges, and will share their experiences with you, along with bringing leading retailers. So we'll have a representative from Waitrose, who are massive supporters of SALSA as well as BRCGS START. So they will talk about their perspective and how do they see both the schemes coming together. So if you have not signed up to the session, please do sign up and be with us next time. I think over to the questions now, and we have a few. So I'll start off with the very first one. I think, Helen, you've covered this already, but in regards to the various documentation, where are they based, and will there be links provided?
Yeah, we can provide links. They are actually live on the BRCGS website at the moment, and they are linked to the START standard. So please go on to brcgs.com and find them there. Alternatively, if you are a SALSA member, you may want to talk to the SALSA team about that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question, I think, is aimed at Bonnie. Can my SALSA mentor help me transition from SALSA onto the BRCGS intermediate program?
Yeah, I would say that many of our auditors and mentors have experience of both schemes. So we'll audit for SALSA and we'll audit for BRCGS. They have the right expertise and experience. So basically, yeah, ask them or ask us, and we'd be happy to find somebody to help with that onward journey.
Thank you, Bonnie. And Helen, from your perspective at Cardiff Met 0 to 5, is there anything that you can support with? With the
yeah, we're very fortunate. If you are a manufacturer in Wales, that we have funded support from the Welsh Government. So we have, like I say, a team of technologists who are very experienced in mentoring and helping to implement the requirements of any third-party scheme. We also work outside of Wales at the moment. We're doing quite a lot of remote work. You know, surprise, surprise. Doing quite a lot of remote work with identifying gaps in systems, helping people to understand what they need to do to evidence requirements and so on. So by all means, anything that, like I said earlier in my presentation, if there are gaps or if you need some support, please contact us.
Thank you. I guess this is a question for both the schemes, and perhaps, Helen, you can add your point of view here as well. Okay. In regards to paperwork that's associated, and as we know with the industry, paperwork's one big bugbear for not just the organizations as well as the auditors when they go on to site to audit. So from a SALSA perspective, if we start with that, Bonnie, and perhaps I can add in the BRCGS elements later. So from a SALSA perspective, paperwork-wise, what is the stance?
Okay, so I think that there's no doubt that that paperwork is required as evidence of compliance to our requirements, and I think that obviously that's the same for you, Richa. Yes. I think we try to be pragmatic about our paperwork, so I think that that's maybe a difference with SALSA in that we can have one document that fulfills multiple functions as we try to help small businesses reduce the paperwork burden, But yeah, there's no doubt it involves paperwork, and the bigger that you get and the more complicated the standard gets, the more paperwork's involved.
Absolutely. And if I can add the BRCGS elements to it, as I think Helen's already highlighted, where SALSA has more of a holistic approach, BRCGS standards are quite prescriptive. So we require specific details, and specific details captured in a certain way that needs to be presented as evidence. So you can look at from both elements, that whether you call it paperwork or you move with the industry, with the technology, and digitalize your processes. But the evidence is required when it comes to it. So if it's not captured, it's not done situation when it comes to, I think, both the schemes. So unfortunately, there is a little bit more element of evidence that needs to be provided by the organizations, but how you go about it, there are various tools available in the market, I think, at this stage, and especially with the era we're living in, and with the remote audit elements again. So it's just how the organization wants to go forward and improve.
I think, Richard, from my experience of working with startup businesses, micro and small businesses, it's ensuring that the system that is developed by the organisation not only fulfills the requirements of the standard for evidence, but it can be maintained in a way that is efficient and user-friendly as possible. So what that looks like for one company might look slightly different for another company, but the key to all of this is supporting companies to optimize their position. And as they grow, as they gain knowledge, as they gain skills, and as they develop, they can also then develop their system. And whether they develop it and digitize it or however they want to do it is what's appropriate, I suppose, for the business. And that's what I've learned over the years. Those businesses that can do that and can apply and implement that flexibility and responsiveness and keep it simple are those that can maintain the system without a lot of anxiety or stress. And those that don't, then they unfortunately can find it quite difficult and challenging to maintain that paperwork burden, because it becomes a burden. So if we can help companies right at the start and pitch it right, it's less of a burden for business.
Absolutely, completely agree with that stance, Helen. Thank you so much for that added perspective. Now, I think a very interesting questions come in. Can members be certified to both the schemes, especially while they are transitioning over? So, Bonnie, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is yes, and that's one of the purposes of what we've been developing here is so that businesses are able to make that transition more smoothly without potentially losing one or the other certifications in the process. So yeah, the short answer is yes. If you're a member of SALSA looking to transition, then I would say just talk to us and we can agree how that will be most effectively managed.
Absolutely, thank you. A question on the roadmap now, Helen. So where we identified those 5 questions for businesses and where we say that there's the 5, are they seen as a minimum requirement or a qualifying criteria for BRCGS, or is that
no? These are not criteria for either standard. These are indicators based on research and information and knowledge over that has been gathered from this research and previous knowledge, understanding how a business develops and evolves their management systems over many years, and taking all of that information as an indicator. Because the way that we looked at it and designed it was, if I'm a business, I'm starting from zero, how long does it take? That's a question I get asked all the time. How long is it going to take for me to get certificated, and how much is it going to cost me? Okay, those are the 2 questions. And unfortunately, I have to go back to businesses and say, well, it depends on your resources, it depends on your knowledge, it depends on. So that's why it's quite difficult. And that's why there's an asterisk there, because I know I've been involved with some businesses that have had quite a low risk product category with a dedicated unit, with some strong individuals in there, with resources, money, and a number of different things all pulled together at the right time, have gained certification within a short period of time. So it kind of, it's a multiple faceted sort of challenge, I suppose, for any business. So it depends on the business. So those are indicators only. Is that sufficiently clear? Indicators only. It's not a requirement of either standard. It's to help you. It's to give you an indication as a business. And using the gap analysis, the self-assessment checklist, and the tools will give you even more information to help you to understand how far away you are from compliance to the particular scheme. Is that okay, Richa?
Yes, no, absolutely. And if I may just add a little bit to it, which I think we covered in the previous webinar, in regards to minimum requirements, there's essentially no minimum requirements for either of the standards, I think. The only caveat we have within the BRCGS standard implementations is you need to, if you are a new business, you've just commissioned a new business, you need to have a minimum of 3 months worth of paperwork or records. And what that essentially helps the auditor with is to really understand whether the processes have been embedded or not. So that is the only caveat associated with the BRCGS standard. And apart from that, there's essentially no minimum requirements that we would state need to be in place. But that sort of is linked to the next question that's come in as well. So if we are a new business, can we immediately go for BRCGS intermediate, or do we need to go down the SALSA route, or is there a preference way?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
I think this relates to my previous answer.
Yeah.
I think the tools that we've designed, use the tools and ask yourselves those questions. And if you can answer yes to all of them or no to all of them, or take action to help you, to put you in the best position, that will help you understand which is the appropriate scheme to go with. But I'm hoping that the tools that we've designed will give you the information to consider what is appropriate for you at this time. And I think that is really important, because the last thing I would want for any business is to, number one, jump into a situation where I think, no, I'm going to go for BRCGS, full food safety, issue 8 from a standing start. That would be extremely challenging. It would be extremely resource hungry. It would take a lot of knowledge and skills. It would take sufficient sort of financial support, but it's not impossible. It can be done, but the project would be very resource hungry. So it depends on how you want to manage your business, and it's a bigger sort of question around the whole strategy, your organisation, your culture, how you can develop your systems. And it's not just getting the certificate; it's maintaining the systems and your quality management system and all of the requirements to provide evidence on an ongoing basis. So it's not just a front-loaded project where you have to have all these resources and so on. It's something that has to be built into the behaviours of the business, the culture of the business, and the business has to commit to it ongoing. It's a requirement of doing business. So, you know, all of those things need to be considered. So I would encourage anybody thinking about which direction to go in, use the tools, and then talk to the scheme owner and get some further dialogue going, with the scheme owners, so that you can get a good understanding of where you think you are and what is appropriate at this time. And I think what's so great about what we've done here is there's an evolution, there's a pathway, and that pathway can be accelerated depending on the skills, the knowledge, the resources you have, the facilities, etc. All of those things combined will help you to move along that pathway, that journey to certification and accreditation.
Thank you, Helen. I think the next question is a bit similar, related to what we've already indicated, but I'll still let you add anything that you feel or you believe needs to be added. So this one's more about, in case somebody's on the SALSA scheme, how long should they stay on the scheme before they can transition on into the BRCGS START intermediate program? Is there an indicative or I'm guessing this is more again based on the way the businesses are set up and their own internal resources?
As an independent person, my view on this is it depends on the business. I'm sorry. Like I said, strategically, if the business decides they want to manufacture and they want to remain a certain size and they want to supply a certain market, then SALSA may be the appropriate scheme for them and fulfill their business model, their strategy, their bottom line, etc. And they may never want to transition, and that's absolutely fine, you know. So it kind of depends on the business's strategy and what they want to do, and where they want to sit in the marketplace, and so on. If you have another company who is growing, who has SALSA, has been operating SALSA successfully and maintaining it, and has the knowledge, skills, resources, and the facilities and the processes all in place, established, and they have opportunities to enter new markets or put their product into new channels, their customers might say, sorry, we can't accept you as a supplier unless you have X, Y, Z certification in place. So that could be a trigger for somebody to transition. So there are lots of different factors which a business would need to consider on that transition, on that step. But hopefully the tools that we've put in place will aid them in that decision-making process.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Thank you so much for that, Helen. I think there's one final question that's come in, but perhaps that's aimed at BRCGS issue 9. So the question is about when the draft version would be out and the date of launch of issue 9. All I would say is please just bear with us. We are in the process of finalizing the timeline, and we will be issuing some further communication fairly shortly. So once the information is out in the public domain, we will be informing, talking about it a lot. And as you know, Food 9 being the biggest standard, so there will be a lot of communication that comes out. So please bear with us on that. If there's no other questions, then all that's left for me to say is thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session today. It's been really informative for me as well, because it's always something that you learn, and although we work together as 3 organizations on this project, but the extensive research that went into developing the toolkits was quite encouraging, and definitely what Helen's come up with is as we said before, that it's something we think the businesses was really value out of. Please do take time to download the documents, have a read through. And if you have any further questions for either Bonnie at SALSA, Helen at 0 to 5, or BRCGS, and that would be me. So just drop us a note. Our contact details and how to get in touch are all mentioned on the toolkits. So please do make use of it. And thank you so much to Helen and Bonnie for the session today. And we look forward to having you all present at the next session. That's where we have the retailer and the practical steps, and would actually add benefit in terms of informing everyone. And you can ask somebody who's actually gone through this process and really learn from their experiences as well. So thank you, everyone, and we'll catch up soon.